Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving right into that iconic television moment millions of fans wanted, waited for, and literally celebrated in their living rooms: Rachel Green getting off the plane. We all know the original ending of Friends, right? It delivered this massive wave of emotional relief. It was hopeful, it was romantic, and yeah, it was simple. But what if it wasn't? Today, we're looking at an analysis of a fascinating alternate reality that absolutely challenges everything we thought we knew about that famous finale.
So let's play with this massive what-if scenario. What if Rachel actually flies to Paris and Ross is just left standing alone in his apartment? Picture the scene for a second. He rushes to the airport, he confesses his deep love, she listens really carefully, but she stays on board. It's a simple change, honestly, but as we look at the source analysis of the series, this one single divergence completely rewires the entire DNA of the show.
The analysis points out that this hypothetical choice creates a huge ripple effect. By staying on the plane, the ending completely flips. And not just for Ross and Rachel, but for literally every single character in the group. In fact, you could argue that making this choice creates the most realistic ending the show never actually dared to explore. Moving into our first section, the iconic finale altered, the ultimate what if. To understand why this alternate choice matters so much, we have to look back at how the show built one giant question right from episode 1. And that question was, over 10 seasons, will they end up together? I mean, think about it. They dated, they broke up, they got intensely jealous, they had Emma, and man, they definitely hurt each other. But somehow they always found their way back emotionally. This just goes to show the sheer amount of emotional investment audiences built over nearly a decade. They were the emotional center of the whole series. So when Rachel gets her dream job in Paris, it sets up the ultimate heartbreaking conflict. Next up, Section 2, Rachel's 10-year transformation, from runaway bride to Paris. When we look specifically at Rachel's journey over the course of the series, we realize that choosing the Paris job actually made perfect sense for her character arc. Her entire story was fundamentally about finding independence. Let's trace that evolution. Back in season 1, she's a runaway bride, completely dependent on her father's money, terrified of failures, basically having everything chosen for her. By season 3, she kicks off her entry-level career at Bloomingdale's. Cut to season 5, she's moving up as a super successful executive at Ralph Lauren. And finally, in season 10, she earns this incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with Louis Vuitton in Paris. The job wasn't just some random plot device. It represented absolutely everything she had worked toward after starting out so scared. So the core question becomes love or personal growth. Imagine if instead of getting off the plane for the very first time in her life, she chooses herself. If she chooses personal growth and stays on that flight, the whole series shifts. It moves right away from a traditional romantic fantasy into a highly nuanced story about maturity, timing, and independence. It becomes a story about a character television rarely allowed women to be in early 2000s sitcoms, a woman who can deeply love someone but still choose her own future. That brings us to Section 3, the Ross and Rachel chaos, a history of bad timing. To really get why this matters, we have to look honestly at their historical relationship, toxicity, and miscommunication, which, let's be real, fans are still debating decades later, thanks to the infamous "we were on a break" argument. When you compare their realities side by side, it reveals a picture of intense chemistry mixed with some pretty deep insecurity. You have Ross struggling with jealousy and control, while Rachel is struggling with uncertainty. Fast forward to the finale, Ross has a very stable, established life in New York, while Rachel is staring down a massive, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in Paris. And let's not forget, both of them repeatedly sabotaged the relationship over the years. So you really have to wonder, giving up Paris for Ross actually undermined Rachel's years of growth, just pulling her back into a dynamic that was never really resolved. But here is where things get really emotionally complicated. Section 4, Saving Through Separation, the distance to grow. You see, staying on the plane probably wouldn't mean they are over forever. In fact, the source analysis suggests that leaving for Paris might actually be the exact thing that saves their relationship. Because almost every major conflict they had came down to emotional immaturity and bad timing, forcing some actual distance between them could have been the ultimate cure. Distance forces growth in a few distinct phases.
First, Rachel gets to discover who she is completely outside of New York and outside the emotional chaos of their relationship. Then, Ross finally has to learn to let go of his need for control and those deep insecurities. And finally, step 3, they reunite years later, but this time they are actually capable of a healthy relationship. Not because some TV destiny forced them together in an airport, but because they actually grew up. It would be quieter, more bittersweet, and way more adult.
Moving into Section 5, the real message of Friends, transition and growing up. This alternate path completely shifts the emotional direction of the entire finale, steering it away from a comforting sitcom trope into something much deeper and way more profound for the whole cast. Let's consider this tale of two endings. The original ending gave us a comforting, clean, emotional resolution. Monica and Chandler get their home, Phoebe is happily married, Joey is, well, Joey, and Ross and Rachel reunite. It's a very traditional romantic fantasy. But the alternate ending? That one is painfully real. It's full of emotional uncertainty. The group truly grows apart. People change cities, and relationships evolve. Look, sitcom finales in 2004 demanded instant emotional payoff and closure, for sure. But this alternate path demands we face the bittersweet reality of careers actually separating friends. And that crucial point is captured perfectly in a quote from our source material. Sometimes the hardest part of growing up is realizing you can't stay in Central Perk forever. Oof. Underneath all the comedy, the true message of the show was always about transition. It was about your 20s ending, adulthood officially arriving, and people changing while trying desperately to hold on to the comfort of their past. Rachel staying on that plane would symbolize that absolutely perfectly. Because if Rachel never gets off the plane, we get a messy, emotional, unfinished life. By allowing Rachel to fully become the person she always wanted to be, the ending becomes less about television fantasy and much more about brave, messy reality. Maybe Ross learns some patience, maybe they reunite years later, or, you know what? Maybe they don't. But the story survives and thrives because it reflects real life. It honestly might have been the bravest ending television could have ever given us. And that right there is exactly why this debate still matters today. Great stories survive because audiences just keep questioning them. So, we're going to leave you with this provocative thought to cap off our explainer today. If you could rewrite one Friends ending, what would you change first? Really think about it and consider how one small shift could change everything you thought you knew about your favorite stories. Thank you so much for joining me and keep exploring.